so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Um, I'm Olufunmilola from Nigeria. Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, we can hear
Hello?
you fine, thank you.
Hello? Artificial intelligence and inclusive futures, a systematic review of global adoption, regional impacts, and pathways for equitable distance education. Next slide, please. This is my presentation outline. Hello? Next slide, please. Hello? Hello? Yes,
We
thank
we
you.
we are changing the slides. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, the background and context of the study. Over the past 2 decades, online and distance education has grown significantly, and artificial intelligence is now positioned as a transformative force in this space. Not all learners benefit equally from technology-driven education, and also structural inequalities remain in terms of who benefits, how they benefit, and to what extent. Artificial intelligence serves as a significant platform for opportunities in education. It is an adaptive learning platform that enhances engagement. Its predictive analytics supports students' retention. Also, artificial intelligence enabled assistive technologies also expand accessibility for learners with disabilities. Despite its numerous opportunities in education, there is this growing equity concerns with the use of AI as it often ignores cultural differences and local context. Also, digital divides and infrastructural gaps limit adoption, especially in the global south. Without deliberate attention to equity, AI risks reinforcing existing inequalities. It is critical to know that human-centered, socially just approaches are essential for future digital education. Artificial intelligence plays a transformative role in distance learning education. It is positioned as a major force in online and distance education, expanding beyond traditional e-learning tools. The core applications of AI in distance education include adaptive learning platforms, which helps to personalize learning pathways, thereby enhancing user engagement. We also have predictive analytics, which helps to identify students who are at risk and also improve retention rates. The AI-enabled assistive technologies help to support learners with disabilities and expand accessibility. Next slide, please. In terms of global adoption, the patterns of AI in distance learning education, there is a strong uptake in the global north, while the global south still grapples with limited adoption in the which are majorly due to infrastructure and policy gaps. Also, equity is a major cause of concern in the adoption of AI in distance education because it poses a risk of reinforcing inequalities if it is designed without attention to cultural differences and local contexts. Problem statement. Next slide. Thank you. Artificial intelligence is positioned as transformative in distance education, but adoption often reproduces structural inequalities. The lack of attention to cultural differences, local contexts, and digital divide undermines inclusivity. Also, marginalized communities are frequently excluded from design and governance processes. Research questions. The questions that pushed this research are: how has AI been adopted in online and distance education globally? What regional patterns of impact are evident, particularly in the global south? What barriers and enablers shape inclusive adoption of AI in distance education? What future pathways can ensure AI contributes to accessibility, equity, and learner empowerment in higher education? Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yes, the methodology employed in this systematic review is the Prisma flow diagram. From this diagram, we can see that just 142 studies were included in the study after carrying out identification, screening, eligibility. At the end of the day, only 142 studies were included in the study. The analytical framework that guided this research include the thematic synthesis, which was used to identify recurring patterns across studies with focus on AI applications, outcomes, barriers, and enabling conditions. Also, comparative regional analysis was carried out. This helped to compare adoption and impact across regions, especially the global north versus the global south. Through these, disparities in infrastructure, policy, and cultural adaptation were noted. Equity and decolonial theory lens interrogated how AI intersects with power, access, and justice. It challenged techno-deterministic narratives and centered on marginalized voices and local context in analysis. Also, as part of the analytical framework, critical interrogation of AI in education asked not just what AI does, but who it serves and how it serves these individuals. It also helped to evaluate inclusivity, accessibility, and empowerment outcomes. Now, looking at the global adoption trends. Sorry, next slide. Next slide, please. Looking at the global adoption and global trends, there is concentration in global north. As revealed in this study, in terms of global adoption trends, there is concentration in global north, like I said. A majority of AI applications in distance education are developed and deployed in North America, Europe, and parts of Asia. Also, the stronger infrastructure, funding, and supportive policies peculiar to these areas have significantly driven adoption. However, the limited uptake in Global South are mostly hinged on infrastructural limitations such as internet connectivity, hardware access, wide funding gaps, and reliance on external donors are also major limiting factors. A major limiting force is also policy misalignment with local educational priorities. There is uneven distribution of AI benefits, which reinforces global digital divide. Learners in marginalized regions also risk exclusion from transformative opportunities of AI in distance learning, which poses equity implications. Regional impacts. Next slide, please. Looking at regional impacts of the adoption of AI in distance learning, there are positive outcomes in the global north. For example, in universities in the United States, adaptive learning platforms have been adopted, such as Coursera AI tools, which are used to personalize student learning. Also, some European institutions have applied predictive analytics to flag students who are at risk. This has greatly improved retention in students. Also, AI-enabled assisted technologies such as speech-to-text screen readers have been widely adopted to support learners with disabilities. Of course, the enabling factors include strong infrastructure, funding, and supportive policies in these areas. In the Global South, however, there are challenges. For instance, there is a problem of limited internet connectivity in rural Africa, which is a constraint in AI adoption in distance learning. Also, South Asian universities face funding gaps. They rely heavily on donor-supported projects. There's also the issue of policy misalignment in parts of Latin America, where AI tools are imported but not adapted to local pedagogies. There is also the lack of contextual adaptation. For instance, tools designed for Global North often fail locally and usually marginalized communities are excluded from design and governance processes. Looking at the positive outcome, next slide, please. Looking at positive outcomes of AI in distance education, there is enhanced learner engagement. For instance, the adaptive learning platforms are tailored to the content that individuals can relate with. Institutions have also reported better retention rates and reduced dropout levels. AI-enabled assisted technologies such as automated captioning have significantly impacted learners that have disability issues, thereby enabling inclusive participation. Looking at evidence from case studies, in the global north, for instance, the MIT and Stanford in the United States of America have employed adaptive learning platforms which have improved engagement and course completion rates in students. United Kingdom universities have also adapted predictive analytics dashboards, which have reduced dropout rates by flagging students who are at risk very early in their academics. In Canada, AI-enabled assistive technologies increase participation of students with disabilities. Also, there is emerging potential of AI adoption in the global south. For instance, in South Africa, AI pilots in schools have improved teacher efficiency and student performance when connectivity was stable. The case study comparing Canada and Paraguay showed success when AI tools were localized to cultural and pedagogical contexts. In Southern Africa, particularly Idivos, the adoption of large language models supported teaching, but highlighted risk of bias if tools were not adapted to local realities. Now, looking at systemic barriers to inclusive AI adoption. Next slide, please. Systemic barriers to inclusive AI adoption. These barriers include digital divides. Sorry, next slide, please. Systemic barriers to inclusive AI adoption. That's where I am now. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. The systemic barriers to inclusive AI adoption include digital divide, which has to do with unequal access to internet connectivity, devices, and digital infrastructure. This is particularly acute in rural and low-income regions. Also, there is lack of contextual adaptation, as most AI tools are often designed for global north, and there is limited relevance to local context, languages, and cultural practices. There's also the issue of opaque algorithms, which is characterized by lack of transparency in how AI systems make decisions. This often results in risk of bias and exclusion of marginalized learners. Limited participation of marginalized communities is also very evident, as most communities affected by inequities are rarely involved in design and governance, which usually result in solutions that fail to meet their peculiar needs. Next slide, policy implications. The first policy implication I'll be talking about is inclusive AI governance. Policies must ensure equitable access to AI tools in distance education. And of course, the communities must be involved and not marginalized during decision-making and governance structures. Infrastructure investment is also very critical, and government should prioritize digital infrastructure such as broadband devices to bridge the divide in connectivity. Also, there should be public-private partnerships that can help scale connectivity in underserved regions. The localization and cultural adaptation is also very important. Policies should encourage local adaptation of AI tools to reflect the cultural languages of communities so as to fit in their cultural context. Also, there should be avoidance of one-size-fits-all imports from the global north. There should be transparency and accountability. There should be mandatory algorithm transparency to reduce bias and exclusion. There should also be establishment of monitoring frameworks for ethical AI use in education. Talking about sustainable funding models, there should be long-term funding strategies needed to avoid reliance on short-term donor projects, which may not be give room for the achievement of the major goal. Also, there should be encouragement of national and regional investment in AI for education. It is also important for international collaboration between agencies, non-governmental agencies, governments. This collaboration should serve the interest of the locals, thereby promoting strong cooperation to strengthen local innovation ecosystems. Conclusively, the next slide, please. Artificial intelligence has transformative potential in distance education, but it is very sad to know that the adoption is quite uneven. The Global North institutions have demonstrated measurable gains in terms of engagement, retention, and accessibility. The Global South pilots show promising potential, but the systemic barriers that have been identified in this study have limited impact, and this should be worked on as it has been recommended. Without equity-focused strategies, AI risks reinforcing existing inequalities rather than bridging these inequalities. The future pathways. Next slide. There should be equity-centered design, which should be embedded in inclusivity and accessibility. Also, the marginalized communities should be fully integrated in all these processes so that they will not be left out. Also, the infrastructure should be strengthened, such as investment in broadband, devices, and digital literacy to close these wide gaps. Also, policy and governance should be strengthened. There should be mandatory transparency, accountability, and ethical AI use in education. Policies must also align with local pedagogical priorities. Localization, cultural adaptation must be prioritized. AI must be adapted to local languages, contexts, and educational practices. Also, there should be a strong partnership between the Global North and South institutions to exchange ideas, to share innovative and best practices. These are selected references from this study. I want to sincerely appreciate you for the organizers for the opportunity given to me to present this this paper at this platform. Thank you so much for your attention for listening.